What's up, Internet? Welcome to Coffee with Dad. I'm your host, Thad Diaz, author of the Cigar City Case Files, a hard-boiled detective series set in the city of Tampa that follows the exploits of an active duty firefighter who's a bail bondsman and a PI on his days off. Today, we're talking about a legend in the industry. That's Robert Crais. Robert Crais is credited by a lot of folks, and I certainly agree with the assessment of bringing the hard-boiled detective into the 80s. And, he literally took the baton from Raymond Chandler and Ross McDonald and Dashiell Hammett. And he does that in a way that very much brings these hard-boiled stories into the 80s. And so, he's not just imitating the people who came before him. He draws on the tradition. He draws on a lot of the tropes, but he definitely brings it into a new era, into the 80s, and he melds it with a lot of what's going on in that time period. Now, Elvis Cole, he's a detective for a new era, and he still has a lot of those old school hard boiled tropes. He's smart, he's tough, he's stubborn, and he is willing to take a beating for the innocent and the vulnerable. And I love that about him. And we see that same honor that you see in Philip Marlowe, Patrick Kinsey, Harry Bosch. But Cole, he's got a little bit of a lighter touch. He's much more of a jokester. He's got that ridiculous Pinocchio clock in his office. And, he's got some times where he himself is willing to be a little more vulnerable than your traditional hard-boiled detective. And he's got some defense mechanisms that are a little less gruff. He's more self-deprecating. He's got that kind of kind of jokester thing going on. But none of that makes him less tough. It's just a different hard-boiled detective, like I said, for a different era. But then there's Joe Pike, right? Now Joe's a different story, right? Um, Joe is quiet, he's disciplined, and he's almost impossible to rattle. Elvis talks while Pike kind of sits back and watches, right? Elvis is a point man on asking the questions, but Pike's the one who goes and gets that direct answer when it's needed. You know what I'm saying? So together, those two guys, they make this really great combination. And we kind of see that in other detectives stories as well. We'll talk about that maybe sometime as being a trope of having the tough guy. Hawk comes to mind for Spencer. Bubba Rogowski comes to mind for Patrick Kinsey. Mouse, oh God, I love that guy. In is Easy Rollins' sidekick. So it's kind of a thing that has kind of is kind of a trope in the industry, but man, or in the genre, but man, does it work. And Pike is a great compliment to him. I like the two of them together. Now, when I reread the Monkey's Raincoat in anticipation of making these videos, I something really stuck out to me because since then I've kind of been watching some classic television, and I was like, man, this really feels like a Rockford Files episode. If Jim Rockford, right, was a member of the A-Team. And when I got to thinking about that, um, I looked up his history, and lo and behold, Robert Crais started his writing career in television. He wrote for Hill Street Blues, Cagney and Lacey, Miami Vice. So now when you think about it, right, a lot of this stuff starts to make sense. The sharp dialogue, the gunplay, right? All that stuff was part of that quality. I think it's quality. 80s television, right? That was just a great era, right? We had a lot of really cool stuff going on in the 80s. But anyway, but you can now see those influences if you look at it in those stories. I think it's great because on those TV shows you'll learn how to keep these stories moving, right? You got an hour to get in and out, really 40 minutes. So he's able to keep that going and keep that flow. I'm willing to bet that that's where he got his pacing and all the other stuff that he does so well, along with obviously the cultural influence of the 80s TV show. Now Elvis Cole, he links the old school hard boiled detectives with a much more modern feeling era, right? And he still goes out and pounds the pavement. He still investigates. He still uh, follows leads and talks to the people to the witnesses, and he's still got to take all of that information. People lying to him constantly, right? He's got to take that information, sift it through his PI brain, compare it to different pieces of evidence, and come up with an answer and figure out who's lying and who's not, right? And but at the same time, Joe Pike with his mercenary persona comes in, and he brings an '80s action movie with him. So you get that kind of gunplay with the investigation, and it it just works. It works. It's got a very '80s hard boiled detective feel, and you know I like that because it feels like Crais respects the stories without um, he respects the stories without being trapped by the convention, right? He brings in kind of a new feel, a new look, and I really like that. So, what's your favorite detective of the '80s? Is it Pike, Cole, and Pike? Is it somebody else? Maybe you prefer the classics. Leave a message. Let me know, or leave a comment. Let me know. We'll talk about it. Talk to you later.